John stood frozen as laughter cracked through the thrift store. His life's work, a quilt stitched with sacrifice, mocked like trash. The sharp sting of humiliation burned deeper than any battlefield wound. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. John Matthews stood stiffly at the counter of Maple Grove thrift store, clutching the folded quilt in his arms as if it were a fragile extension of himself. The late afternoon sun filtered through dusty windows, casting a pale light over the worn linoleum floor and mismatched shelves cluttered with forgotten relics. Around him, the hum of casual shoppers mingled with the faint, musty scent of old clothes and paperbacks. But none of that mattered. His entire world had narrowed down to one sharp moment, Sarah's cruel laughter cutting through the quiet like shattered glass. The quilt was not just a craft project. It was decades of John's life, woven stitch by stitch into a tapestry of memories that refused to be silent. Each patch bore meaning, a faded Air Force insignia sewn with trembling hands after his last mission, a small swatch of camo from his uniform, a square embroidered with the names of comrades lost. He had poured hours into it, sitting by the window in his modest home, tracing the threads of a past few could understand. It was his tribute to a life spent in service, a symbol of pride and pain wrapped in cotton. And yet, here it was, dismissed as some grandma's ugly blanket, the words ringing in his ears like a cruel echo. Sarah didn't know the story behind the quilt. She hadn't seen the long nights spent quilting to keep grief at bay, the physical toll of arthritis that made each stitch a battle. To her, it was just outdated junk cluttering up space, an embarrassing relic better left forgotten. Her sneer wasn't born from cruelty, but from impatience, an impatience fed by a society that worshipped the new, the flashy, the Instagrammable, while ignoring the quiet dignity of what came before. John's jaw clenched as he met her mocking eyes, a tempest raging behind his calm exterior. His anger wasn't loud or explosive. It was a slow burn, a deep ache of betrayal and invisibility. How had things come to this, that the sacrifices etched into his very being were so casually ridiculed? The mocking laughter of strangers nearby only made it worse, unseen allies sharing a cheap joke at his expense. He felt the weight of isolation, not just in that room, but in the shifting attitudes of a community that seemed to lose touch with respect. Outside, the murmurs of outrage began to spread, whispered first among veterans groups, then through local social media pages. Messages poured in from old comrades and neighbors alike, all sharing their disbelief and anger at the thrift store's treatment of a man who had given so much. For John, the support was a fragile balm on a raw wound. The quilt was meant to be a gift, a legacy passed on to someone who would cherish it. Instead, it had become a symbol of dismissal, a reminder that the quiet stories of sacrifice were too often drowned out by the noise of indifference. John folded the quilt carefully, feeling the familiar softness beneath his fingers. The pain of that afternoon was sharp, but beneath it was something stronger, a stubborn thread of pride that refused to be unraveled. He wasn't just a forgotten veteran. He was a keeper of memories, a living testament stitched into every fiber of that quilt. And though today had been a test of patience and respect, John knew this story was far from over. The digital wildfire sparked by the thrift store incident engulfed Maple Grove's quiet streets and spilled far beyond, igniting a swell of voices united in outrage and reverence. Photos of John Matthews's quilt, once ridiculed, now reverberating with newfound meaning, circulated relentlessly, each image a testament to a story too profound to be ignored. Beneath the pixelated squares, a tapestry of grief, valor, and resilience unfolded, touching hearts across social media platforms where empathy and respect battled ignorance in the public arena. Among the hundreds who saw the quilt's journey was Emily Carter, curator at the White House's Historical Division, a woman steeped in the preservation of America's collective memory. Her office was a sanctuary of relics and stories, fragments of courage preserved in glass cases and archival boxes. Emily's own father had returned from Vietnam haunted by the scars of war, his silence a quiet echo in her childhood. When the quilt appeared on her screen, she felt a pull deeper than professional duty, a personal call to honor the sacrifices woven into its every stitch. Emily reached out swiftly, navigating bureaucratic channels with a resolute sense of purpose. Her proposal was bold and unprecedented. John's quilt would be displayed aboard Air Force One during President Taylor's upcoming diplomatic mission, transforming a once dismissed artifact into a soaring symbol of national pride and remembrance. It was an act of reclamation, a restorative gesture to rewrite the narrative of neglect into one of reverence. The quilt, now draped not in dust or disdain but in the corridors of power, would carry with it the voices of veterans whose sacrifices too often faded into silence. When news of the quilt's extraordinary new chapter reached John, his reaction was a complex weave of disbelief and fragile hope. The knot of shame that had tightened around his heart loosened, replaced by an unsteady glow of recognition. His creation, born from solitude and memory, was no longer confined to the cramped shelves of a thrift store or the cruel laughter of a dismissive clerk. It had become a vessel of honor, flying miles above the earth in the company of presidents and dignitaries, an elevated testament to the lives behind the fabric. John's hands trembled as he touched the quilt, feeling the roughness of thread and fabric meld with the weight of renewed purpose. Each patch was a story retold, a memory given breath, no longer invisible but illuminated. The knowledge that his quilt would journey with the president lent him a profound sense of connection, not just to those who had worn the uniform, but to a nation struggling to remember, to respect, and to heal. Meanwhile, Sarah's world shifted beneath her feet. The backlash she initially met with defensiveness soon became a mirror reflecting her ignorance and youthful arrogance. The jeers that once spilled freely from her lips now echoed painfully in the quiet of her thoughts. She began to grasp the true magnitude of what she had dismissed so casually: the years of sacrifice, the invisible wounds, the dignity embodied in John's quilt. Her initial reluctance to confront her mistake gave way to a quiet resolve, an impulse to reach across the chasm she had helped create. With tentative sincerity, Sarah contacted John, her message simple, yet heavy with the weight of apology. It was an olive branch, fragile but genuine, a first step toward reconciliation. In that act lay the possibility of transformation, from ignorance to understanding, from scorn to respect. Sarah's outreach was not just about mending a personal wrong, but about recognizing the enduring power of stories and the quiet hope sewn into every stitch of John's quilt. In this convergence of pain and hope, the quilt transcended its humble beginnings, becoming a beacon of remembrance and a call to empathy. It was a journey not only through fabric and thread, but through the fragile spaces where respect, memory, and humanity intersect. The morning light filtered through the oval windows of Air Force One's presidential cabin, casting a soft glow on the quilt, carefully draped across the captain's chair. Each patch, stitched with painstaking precision, gleamed vividly beneath the elegant lighting, telling silent stories of valor etched into fabric. The quilt was no longer an overlooked relic relegated to dusty shelves or scornful laughter. It had been elevated, exalted, becoming a symbol of national pride and resilience visible to the world. Photographers, journalists, and aides paused reverently, their lenses capturing the radiant tapestry that narrated a veteran's journey with raw authenticity. As news outlets distributed images of the quilt across the country, a collective breath seemed to be drawn, a recognition long overdue, a tribute that transcended politics and partisan divides. The vibrant squares, embroidered with medals, aircraft silhouettes, and the stars of the American flag, resonated deeply with veterans, families, and civilians alike. Comments flooded social media with heartfelt messages, veterans recalling their own stories of sacrifice, citizens expressing newfound appreciation, and communities rallying to honor those who served. The quilt, once mocked, had become a rallying point, an emblem that stitched together threads of shared history, respect, and unity. John Matthews, standing beneath the grandeur of the White House's historic columns, felt a tide of emotions rise as he was ushered into the East Room for the ceremony. The hum of conversation quieted as President Taylor entered, his presence commanding yet warm. The room's ornate chandeliers cast shimmering reflections across the polished floors, but it was John's quilt, now framed and illuminated beside the podium, that held the true brilliance of the moment. President Taylor's voice rang clear, carrying both gratitude and solemn reverence. "This quilt is not just fabric and thread," he declared. "It is a living chronicle of courage, sacrifice, and the enduring spirit of those who have worn the uniform. John Matthews's hands have woven together not only pieces of cloth, but the very essence of American resilience." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing off the walls as John felt a swelling pride that chased away years of silence and pain. Among the attendees stood Sarah, the once dismissive clerk from the Maple Grove thrift store. Her posture was humble, her gaze fixed on John's quilt with newfound reverence. The journey from cynicism to understanding had been jarring, a confrontation with her own ignorance and the consequences of dismissiveness. Now, in the light of this historic moment, she found herself compelled to speak, not as a bystander but as a witness to transformation. Later, in an impromptu interview, she shared her story candidly. "I didn't understand before. I mocked what I didn't know, but seeing the strength behind this quilt, hearing John's story, it changed me. I hope others will learn to listen before judging." John's quilt transcended its material form, becoming a beacon of inspiration that radiated far beyond the walls of government buildings and news cycles. It spoke to the quiet dignity embedded in every veteran's sacrifice, the resilience born from hardship, and the power of empathy to heal wounds carved by misunderstanding. Communities began to organize quilting circles, veteran support groups, and educational programs centered around the quilt's story, fostering dialogue and connection where division had once reigned. The narrative of John Matthews, from the sting of mockery at a small-town thrift store to the solemn honor of a White House ceremony, struck a chord across the nation. It underscored a profound truth. Even in moments of deep injustice, when dignity seems stripped away, the human spirit's capacity for hope and redemption can prevail. This was not merely a story of a quilt, but a testament to the transformative power of respect, the enduring strength of memory, and the unyielding courage of those who serve. Through each stitch, John's legacy wove itself into the fabric of the American story, inspiring countless others to carry forward the torch of honor with pride and humility.